A school janitor's quiet dedication caught Keanu Reeves' eye, and what he did in response changed everything. The sun had barely begun to rise when Ronald James parked his old, battered sedan in the far corner of the Oxbridge Academy parking lot. He always chose the same spot, out of the way, as if to avoid drawing attention to the vehicle's peeling paint and dented bumper. The engine gave one final cough before dying, and Ronald sighed, gripping the steering wheel for a moment. Another day, and another chance to make ends meet. He grabbed his thermos from the passenger seat, gave the dashboard a gentle pat, as if to thank the car for holding on another day, and stepped out. The early morning air was cool, and the world was still quiet except for the faint chirp of birds and the distant rumble of a delivery truck. Oxbridge Academy was coming to life slowly, and Ronald liked it that way. It gave him a moment of peace before the chaos of the day began. Pushing his trusty cleaning cart down the empty corridors, he felt a sense of pride. The floors gleamed under the overhead lights, the result of his meticulous care. He knew most people didn't notice, but that didn't matter to him. For Ronald, it wasn't about recognition. It was about doing the job right. Every classroom, every hallway, every trash can, he approached them all with the same quiet dedication. To Keanu Reeves, a beloved teacher at Oxbridge, Ronald was more than just a janitor. Keanu had been teaching history for years, bringing lessons to life with passion and storytelling. He was adored by his students, not just for his engaging classes, but for his genuine interest in their lives. Keanu noticed the little things, the small acts of kindness and resilience that others overlooked, and Ronald James had caught his attention. It began with Keanu observing Ronald's interactions with students. Despite his tiring job, Ronald always had a kind word or a warm smile ready. "Good morning, Marcus. How's that science project coming along?" Or, "Hey, Jenny, I saw that goal you scored yesterday. Impressive." These small exchanges were a part of his daily rhythm, a way to connect in a role that often felt invisible. But outside these walls, life wasn't as polished for Ronald. He had faced more struggles than most could imagine. Losing his wife to cancer 10 years ago had been the hardest blow of all. Suddenly, he was both mother and father to their 2 children, juggling the roles of provider, caretaker, and disciplinarian. His old sedan, sputtering more often than not, was a daily reminder of his sacrifices. Yet, despite his hardships, Ronald never let his spirit waver. Keanu began to admire Ronald's quiet resilience. It wasn't just the way he kept the school spotless or his interactions with the students. It was his steadfastness, his ability to keep going no matter how tough things were. Keanu saw Ronald replace a broken locker handle before the student even reported it. He saw him work late into the evenings, ensuring the school was ready for the next day. There was something deeply inspiring about Ronald's dedication. One day, as Keanu walked into the staff lounge, an idea began to form. He couldn't let Ronald's hard work go unnoticed. It wasn't about charity, it was about recognizing someone who truly deserved better. Keanu started discreetly gathering information, talking to other staff members and students who admired Ronald just as much as he did. And then, Keanu Reeves took action. What started as a quiet gesture grew into something extraordinary, a moment that would not only change Ronald's life, but also inspire the entire Oxbridge Academy community. He wasn't uninterested, just thoughtful. Raised with the belief that everyone's story mattered, Keanu Reeves learned early on to pay attention to people. Not just their words, but their actions, their struggles, and the little things that often went unnoticed. It was during one of those moments of quiet observation that Keanu started to truly notice Ronald James, the school janitor. To most of the students and staff, Ronald was a background figure, someone who faded into the fabric of Oxbridge Academy. But to Keanu, Ronald stood out. He saw the way Ronald always arrived early, coffee thermos in hand, his cleaning cart rattling softly as he navigated the hallways. He noticed the care Ronald put into his work, wiping down desks, polishing floors, ensuring the school felt more like a second home than just a building. At first, Keanu thought little of it. Ronald was simply doing his job, right? But one afternoon, as Keanu prepared for his next lecture, he glanced out of his office window and saw something that stuck with him. Across the parking lot, Ronald was hunched over the hood of his car, tools spread out on the ground. The old sedan had stalled again, faint smoke rising from the engine. Sleeves rolled up and hands smeared with grease. Ronald worked tirelessly under the sweltering Florida sun. When the car finally sputtered to life, Keanu watched as Ronald wiped his forehead with a rag, muttered something under his breath, and climbed into the driver's seat. That moment stayed with him. The more Keanu observed, the more questions he had. Why was Ronald driving a car that barely ran? How did he manage to show up every day with the same warm smile and kind words despite what seemed to be endless struggles? One afternoon, Keanu decided to approach him. He found Ronald near the lockers, fixing a broken hinge that no one else had seemed to notice. "Hey, Ronald," Keanu said, his voice warm but hesitant. "Need a hand?" Ronald looked up surprised. "Well, hello there, Mr. Reeves," he replied with a grin. "I think I've got it, but I appreciate the offer." Keanu lingered, watching as Ronald tightened the last screw. "You're always fixing things," he said after a pause. "Do you ever get tired of it?" Ronald chuckled, a deep, genuine sound that carried the weight of his years. "Oh, sure," he admitted, "but someone's got to do it, right? Besides, there's something satisfying about making things work again." That conversation was the first of many. Over time, Keanu began to learn more about Ronald. He learned about his two children, how his son dreamed of becoming a mechanical engineer and his daughter wanted to be a teacher. He heard stories of Ronald's late wife, the love of his life, and how her loss had shaped him into the man he was today. Ronald never complained, but Keanu could sense the undertone of exhaustion in his voice, the subtle hints of the sacrifices he made daily to provide for his family. One day, Keanu asked the question that had been on his mind since that moment in the parking lot. "Ronald, why don't you get a new car? That one looks like it's ready to give up on you." Ronald chuckled, shaking his head. "A new car, huh? Well, those things cost money, Mr. Reeves, and money is not something I've got a lot of. Besides, as long as it gets me where I need to go, it's good enough for me." But Keanu couldn't shake the thought. The more he learned about Ronald, the more he felt the weight of his story. Ronald James wasn't just a janitor. He was a father, a mentor, and an unsung hero of the school. He poured his heart into everything he did, asking for nothing in return. That evening, as Keanu graded papers at home, he couldn't focus. Ronald's story weighed heavily on his mind. Finally, he put his pen down and made a decision. He couldn't solve all of Ronald's problems, but he could do something to make his life a little easier. The next day, Keanu shared his idea with the principal and some trusted colleagues. "Ronald works tirelessly for this school and our students," he said passionately. "He deserves more than just words of thanks. Let's get him a reliable car, a way to show him how much he's appreciated." The idea took off. Teachers, students, and even parents came together to fundraise. It started with small donations, but the momentum grew quickly. Bake sales, raffles, and community contributions poured in. And through it all, Keanu led the charge, using his platform as a respected teacher to rally support. When the day finally came to present Ronald with his new car, the entire school gathered in the courtyard. Keanu handed Ronald the keys, his voice choked with emotion. "You've given so much to this school, Ronald. This is our way of giving something back." Ronald stood speechless, tears streaming down his face. I don't know what to say," he stammered. Keanu smiled. "Just say you'll keep being you." The moment was a testament to the power of kindness and the impact one person can have on a community. And as Ronald drove away in his new car, Keanu Reeves knew he had done the right thing, because sometimes noticing the little things can change everything. Keanu Reeves felt a growing sense of urgency, but this wasn't a simple task. Buying a car wasn't something he could handle alone. He needed a plan, and more importantly, he needed help. Keanu started by reaching out to the other teachers at Oxbridge Academy during a staff meeting. "I don't want this to just come from me," he explained, his voice steady but passionate. "It should come from all of us. Ronald James has touched so many lives here. I think it would mean more if we all pitched in." The principal leaned back, nodding thoughtfully. "You're right, Keanu. This isn't just about money. It's about showing Ronald how much he's valued. But you'll need to get the whole school involved. Teachers, students, staff. Are you ready for that?" Keanu hesitated for only a moment before nodding firmly. "I'll do whatever it takes." The next day, Keanu began putting his plan into motion. He started with his students, using a history lesson as an opportunity to test the waters. "Let me ask you something," he said, leaning against his desk. How many of you know Mr. James, our janitor? Hands shot up around the room, accompanied by murmurs of recognition. He's awesome, one student exclaimed. Keanu smiled. He really is, but did you know his car barely runs? He works tirelessly for all of us, yet he never asks for anything in return. I think it's time we did something for him. The students exchanged glances, surprised but intrigued. What do you mean? One of them asked. I mean, we should get him a new car, Keanu said, his tone firm yet hopeful. It doesn't have to be extravagant, just something reliable. If we all contribute, even just a little, we can make it happen. Word began to spread, and Keanu approached other teachers, coaches, and even the school counselor, explaining his idea. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Mr. James is one of the hardest working people here, one teacher said, slipping a $50 bill into Keanu's hand. Count me in. Despite the outpouring of support, Keanu knew that even with everyone's contributions, the cost of a new car was steep. That's when the principal stepped in, contacting a local car dealership and sharing Ronald's story. The dealership manager, touched by the effort, offered to sell a brand new red Jeep SUV at a significant discount. We'll cover the rest, the principal told Keanu. You focus on making this special for him. With the car secured, the focus shifted to the reveal. Keanu wanted it to be a moment Ronald would never forget. After brainstorming with students and staff, they decided the upcoming Friday assembly would be the perfect stage for the big surprise. It was ideal. Everyone would be there to celebrate together. Preparations kicked into high gear. Students painted a giant banner that read, "Thank you, Mr. James," in the school's colors, decorating it with messages of gratitude. Teachers coordinated logistics, ensuring Ronald would be at the assembly without suspecting anything. Keanu rehearsed his speech late into the night, pacing his living room as he practiced the words that he hoped would convey just how much Ronald meant to everyone. As the days ticked by, the excitement grew. Students whispered about the plan in hallways, careful not to let Ronald overhear. Even staff members joined in, contributing to the fund and sharing stories about how Ronald had brightened their days. He once stayed late to help me find a student's lost backpack, one teacher recalled. He didn't have to, but he did it anyway. By Thursday afternoon, everything was ready. The car sat hidden behind the gym, freshly washed and gleaming in the sunlight. The banner was hung, speeches were finalized, and every detail had been meticulously planned. But as the big day approached, Keanu couldn't shake his nervous energy. What if it doesn't go the way I'm imagining? He asked the principal that evening. His voice tinged with doubt. The principal smiled. Keanu, this isn't just about the car. It's about showing Ronald how much he's valued, and that's something no one can misunderstand. Friday morning arrived, and the energy at Oxbridge Academy was electric. Students filed into the auditorium, buzzing with anticipation. Keanu stood backstage, clutching his note cards, taking deep breaths to steady himself. He glanced out at the crowd and saw Ronald sitting quietly near the back, looking as unassuming as ever. The sight filled Keanu with a sense of purpose. This wasn't just about a car. It was about honoring a man who had given so much to everyone without ever asking for anything in return. For Ronald James, Friday morning felt like any other day. The air was crisp as he parked his old sedan in its usual spot at the far end of the parking lot. The engine wheezed and groaned before sputtering to a halt. Ronald sat for a moment, taking a deep breath to mentally prepare for the long day ahead. His routine was predictable: mop buckets, floors to polish, and classrooms to tidy. He loved the rhythm of it, and hard work never bothered him. Little did he know, this day would be anything but ordinary. It was his way of keeping things in order, even when life outside the school walls felt chaotic. But today was different. Even if Ronald didn't know it yet, around mid-morning, as Ronald wheeled his cleaning cart down the hallway, the voice of the headmaster came over the intercom. Good morning, students and staff. Please report to the auditorium for a special assembly. We look forward to seeing you all there. Ronald barely registered the announcement. Assemblies were common at Oxbridge Academy, and they rarely involved him. He figured he'd stick to his routine, maybe get ahead on some maintenance work while the building was quiet. But then one of the teachers approached him with a smile. You should come too, Mr. James. You're going to want to see this. Reluctantly, he followed the flow of students and staff toward the auditorium, slipping into the back row in hopes of blending into the crowd. The large room buzzed with excitement, though Ronald couldn't quite put his finger on why. The headmaster took the stage, greeted by enthusiastic applause. He spoke briefly, welcoming everyone and explaining that today's assembly wasn't about academics or announcements. It was about celebrating a member of their community. That piqued Ronald's interest, though he was still clueless as to what was coming. Then Keanu Reeves walked onto the stage, holding a stack of note cards. Ronald recognized Keanu, the beloved history teacher who was known for his storytelling and the way he connected with students and staff alike. Ronald smiled faintly, assuming Keanu was about to deliver one of his signature inspiring speeches. "Good morning, everyone," Keanu began, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I'm here today because there's someone at this school who deserves recognition, someone who makes this place better every single day." Ronald shifted in his seat, his brows furrowing slightly. He glanced around, wondering who Keanu could be talking about. "I'm talking about Mr. James," Keanu continued, and the room erupted in applause. Ronald froze, completely caught off guard. His hands gripped the edges of his chair as he stared at Keanu on stage. Keanu smiled at the crowd, waiting for the noise to die down before continuing. "Mr. James isn't just our janitor. He's the person who shows up every morning to make sure our classrooms are spotless, our hallways are clean, and our school feels like home. He's the one who fixes what's broken, whether it's a locker, a leaky faucet, or even our spirits when we're having a bad day." The words hit Ronald like a wave. He'd always done his work without expecting thanks, and hearing someone acknowledge it so openly felt overwhelming. The lights dimmed slightly, and a video began to play on the large screen behind Keanu. It was a montage of clips and photos showing Ronald at work, mopping floors, repairing broken chairs, carrying supplies. Interspersed were interviews with students and staff sharing how much Ronald meant to them. "He always has a smile for you," one student said. "He never complains, even when we make his job harder," another admitted sheepishly. Laughter rippled through the audience at that, but Ronald couldn't laugh. He was too stunned, his throat tightening as he tried to process what was happening. By the time the video ended, the entire auditorium was on its feet, clapping and cheering. Keanu stepped forward again, his voice unwavering. "Mr. James, we know you never ask for anything, but we see you. We see how hard you work, how much you care, and how you give so much of yourself to this school. Today, we want to give something back to you." Keanu gestured toward the side of the stage where the double doors opened to reveal a gleaming red Jeep SUV parked under a large banner that read, "Thank you, Mr. James." The entire room erupted in cheers and applause. Ronald's jaw dropped as he stared at the car, his mind struggling to catch up with what his eyes were seeing. "Mr. James," Keanu said, turning toward him with a warm smile, "this is for you, from all of us." The spotlight shifted to Ronald, and the entire room watched as emotion flickered across his face. Slowly, he rose from his seat, his legs feeling unsteady. The applause grew louder, students and staff cheering as he made his way to the stage. "This," Ronald began, his voice breaking as he accepted the keys from Keanu. "I don't even know what to say. Thank you. Thank you all." Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've done so much for all of us, Ronald. It's about time we gave something back to you." The moment was a powerful reminder of the impact one person can have on a community, and as Ronald drove away in his new car later that day, there wasn't a dry eye in the school. Keanu Reeves, who had been seated quietly in the back of the auditorium, hadn't moved. A teacher gently touched his shoulder, urging him to stand. Slowly, he rose to his feet, his legs trembling as he made his way to the stage. The applause was deafening, but all Keanu could focus on was the gleaming red Jeep SUV and the faces of the students and staff who had come together to make this moment happen. When he finally reached the stage, the headmaster extended the keys to him. Keanu hesitated for a moment before taking them, his hands shaking. He looked at the headmaster, then at the crowd, and finally back at the car. I don't know what to say," he stammered, his voice barely audible over the applause. He wiped at his eyes, which had filled with tears. "You didn't have to do this. I just do my job." But as the cheers grew louder, Keanu began to understand that this wasn't just about the car. It was about the lives he had quietly touched and the community that had come together to remind him that his kindness hadn't gone unnoticed. For what felt like an eternity, Keanu stood frozen on stage, staring at the red Jeep SUV parked just a few feet away. The keys felt heavy in his hand, and the enormity of the moment pressed down on him. The room still buzzed with applause, but for Keanu, everything seemed to blur. He was overwhelmed, not just by the gift, but by what it symbolized. Stepping forward slowly, his legs unsteady, Keanu ran a trembling hand along the smooth, polished surface of the car. The bright red paint gleamed under the stage lights, a stark contrast to the battered sedan he had parked in its usual spot earlier that morning. His throat tightened, and when he turned back to face the crowd, his eyes were brimming with tears. The auditorium grew quiet, everyone waiting to hear what he would say. Keanu gripped the microphone tightly, struggling to find the words that could capture what he felt in that moment. I don't know what to say, he began, his voice thick with emotion. This is more than I could have ever imagined. I don't even know how to thank you. He paused, taking a deep breath, glancing out at the sea of faces, students, teachers, staff, all looking back at him with warmth and admiration. I've always believed, he continued, his voice steadier now, that kindness isn't something you do for recognition. It's something you do because it's the right thing. I've tried to live my life that way, and to see all of you come together like this, it means more than I can ever put into words. The audience erupted into applause again, but Keanu raised a hand signaling that he wasn't done. You know, he said, his voice softer, when my wife passed away 10 years ago, I didn't think I'd ever feel this kind of joy again. She was my rock, my partner, and losing her left a hole in my heart that I didn't think anything could fill. But I had 2 kids to raise, and I knew I had to keep going for them. His voice broke slightly as he continued. Every morning when I get up, I think about them. They're the reason I do what I do, why I work so hard. I want them to see that no matter what life throws at you, you keep pushing forward. You keep giving, even when you don't have much to give. He paused again, glancing down at the keys in his hand. And now, because of all of you, because of this incredible gift, I can give them a little more. I can get to work without worrying if my car will break down. I can take my daughter to her dance recital without wondering if we'll make it there. This isn't just a car, it's a blessing. One that will change our lives in ways you can't imagine. Tears streamed down his face now, and several in the audience were wiping their eyes too. Keanu looked at the headmaster, his voice soft but filled with gratitude. Thank you. I don't know how you thought of this, but you've done something extraordinary. You saw me, you saw the work I do, and you cared enough to make this happen. That means more than I could ever say. The auditorium erupted into cheers again, and Keanu, overwhelmed but deeply touched, stepped away from the microphone. As he stood by the car, surrounded by a community that had come together to celebrate him, he realized that this moment would stay with him forever. Not because of the crib, but because of the love and appreciation that had filled the room. And for the first time in years, Keanu Reeves felt truly seen. Keanu Reeves pulled the headmaster into a hug, holding him tightly as the crowd erupted into applause once again. When they broke apart, Keanu turned back to the microphone, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions. To everyone who made this possible, students, teachers, parents, I want you to know that you've reminded me of something I almost forgot. No matter how tough life gets, there's always good in the world. There are always people who care. The principal stepped forward, placing a hand on Keanu's shoulder. Mr. Reeves, this school is lucky to have you. You're not just a part of this community, you're the heart of it. And today we're all here to celebrate you. The applause that followed was deafening. Students stood on their chairs, cheering and clapping, while teachers wiped away tears. Keanu looked out at the crowd, his heart swelling with a gratitude so profound it felt almost unreal. For years, he had worked quietly, believing his efforts went unnoticed. But today, standing on that stage, he realized just how much his presence had mattered. As the assembly began to wind down, students approached the stage to shake Keanu's hand, hug him, or simply thank him. His children, who had been invited as part of the surprise, joined him on stage, their faces glowing with pride. "Dad, you deserve this," his son said, throwing an arm around him. Later, as the crowd began to disperse, Keanu took a moment to sit behind the wheel of the Jeep. He ran his hands over the steering wheel, marveling at how it felt to sit in a car that didn't rattle, didn't groan, and didn't feel like it might fall apart at any moment. His daughter climbed into the passenger seat, laughing as she explored the new car's features. "This is amazing, Dad," she said, her eyes wide with wonder. "It's like a dream." Keanu smiled, the weight of years of struggle beginning to lift. "It is," he said quietly, "and it's all because of them." But as Keanu drove out of the parking lot later that day, he realized the car was just the beginning. The real gift was the reminder that his work, his kindness, and his sacrifices had not been in vain. As the assembly ended, students poured out of the auditorium, but a steady stream lingered, each waiting for a moment to speak to Keanu. Some shook his hand, others gave him quick hugs, and a few simply said, "Thank you, Mr. Reeves," before hurrying off, their cheeks flushed with emotion. Keanu stood near the stage, overwhelmed but smiling, as his children clung to his sides, their own eyes sparkling with pride. One student, a shy sophomore, approached hesitantly, clutching a piece of notebook paper. "Mr. Reeves," she said softly, "I just wanted to give you this." She handed him the folded note and disappeared into the crowd before he could say anything. Opening it, he found a heartfelt message. "Thank you for always being so kind. There were days I felt invisible, but your smile reminded me that someone saw me. I hope today showed you how much you mean to all of us." Keanu read the note twice, his throat tightening. It wasn't just the car or the applause. It was this, the quiet acknowledgement of the little things he thought no one noticed. For the first time in a long time, Keanu Reeves felt truly seen. Later that afternoon, as Keanu prepared to leave, the red Jeep SUV waited for him in the staff parking lot, a stark contrast to the tired sedan it replaced. His children climbed into the back seat, laughing as they explored every new feature. "It even smells new," his daughter exclaimed, running her hands along the upholstery. Keanu paused before getting in, turning to look back at the school. The day's events replayed in his mind, the cheers, the speech, the headmaster's steady voice as he spoke about the impact one person could have. Keanu had spent years teaching in these hallways, quietly going about his work, never expecting recognition. But today had shown him that every act of kindness, no matter how small, leaves a mark. Driving home, the car hummed smoothly beneath him, a far cry from the sputtering groans he was used to. His son leaned forward from the back seat, a broad grin on his face. "You know, Dad, this car is awesome. But what's even cooler is that everyone loves you so much. I mean, they really love you." Keanu glanced at him in the rearview mirror, his heart swelling. "It's not about being loved, son. It's about doing what's right, even when no one's watching. And sometimes, when you least expect it, people show you that they were watching all along." That evening, after the excitement of the day had settled, Keanu sat at the kitchen table, staring out the window. The red Jeep was parked in the driveway, gleaming even in the dim light of the setting sun. His children were in the living room, chatting animatedly about their plans for the weekend. For the first time in years, Keanu felt a profound sense of peace. He thought of the note from the student, tucked safely in his pocket, and the way the headmaster had described him during the assembly. It wasn't just about the car, it was about what it symbolized. Keanu realized that all the little things he'd done, all the kindness he'd given without expecting anything in return, had made a difference. And for the first time, Keanu Reeves understood the true impact of his quiet dedication. Keanu Reeves had offered his kindness without expecting anything in return. And yet, it had created a ripple effect. The students, the teachers, even the parents, they had noticed. And now they had given back in a way that left him humbled and deeply moved. In the days that followed, the story of the assembly spread beyond the walls of Oxbridge Academy. Students shared clips of the moment on social media, and before long, it gained traction online. People from all over began commenting on the posts, sharing their own stories of unsung heroes who had impacted their lives. Keanu was stunned by the attention, but grateful for the chance to inspire others. If his story encouraged even one person to show kindness or gratitude, then it was worth it. Reflecting on that day, Keanu knew the most valuable lesson wasn't one he had learned. It was the one the students had demonstrated. Gratitude has the power to transform, It connects people, lifting them in ways that go far beyond material gestures. A simple acknowledgement of someone's hard work and dedication can light a spark that carries far beyond the moment. For Keanu, the red Jeep would always be a reminder of the community that had embraced him, not just for what he did, but for who he was. And for the students, the day served as a lesson in the impact of coming together to celebrate the people who make their world better, one small act at a time. As the sun set on that unforgettable day, Keanu sat on the porch with his children, watching them laugh and joke as they talked about the future. He smiled, knowing that the best lessons aren't taught in classrooms. They're lived through moments like these. "This isn't just about me," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "It's about all of us. Kindness is contagious, and if we keep it going, who knows what it can do?" So let's take a moment to reflect on this story and ask ourselves, who in our lives deserves a thank you, a kind word, or even just a smile? Because as Keanu's story shows us, even the smallest gestures can lead to extraordinary moments. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of kindness and community. Together, we can create a world where no good deed goes unnoticed, because kindness isn't just a gift, it's a legacy.